Hi, my name's Alyssa. Thanks for watching today. Before we get started, we wanted to fill you in on our church. Here at Grace, we have a mission and a purpose. Our goal is to help people discover truth, decide on Jesus, demonstrate change, and deploy for others. If you're looking for a church, we would love for you to come be a part of what God is doing here at Grace. You can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. We would also like to invite you to one of our Sunday morning services. Check out ohiograce.com for a list of campuses and service times in your area. We have a great time gathering for music, hanging out, and learning about who God is and how that affects our lives. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you here next week at Grace.
Well, it was about a month or so before Jesus' death. He begins his long walk back to Jerusalem, where Jesus knows exactly what's going to happen. He knows he's going to be killed. And he doesn't rush it. He takes his time, which is understandable, and he stops in town after town after town, and village after village after village, as he's walking towards Jerusalem. And what we have recorded for us during this period of time, we have recorded for us kind of Jesus' last teachings. And so this is what we've been talking about for the last couple weeks, and this is what we're going to be talking about as we lead into Easter. We're talking about the things that Jesus said and that Jesus did as he was literally on the road to the cross. Now, a couple weeks ago, we began talking about how he was in this region called Perea, and he's teaching, and the crowds are following him everywhere, which was so typical of Jesus while he was doing his public ministry. I mean, people wanted to hear what Jesus had to say because Jesus was saying things that they had never heard before, and people wanted to see what Jesus was going to do because Jesus was doing things that they had never seen before. And so wherever Jesus went, crowds followed. So after Perea, Jesus heads south, and he gets to this city called Jerusalem, or not Jerusalem, he's going to Jerusalem. He gets to the city called Jericho, and Jericho is about 18 miles away from Jerusalem. Remember, they're walking this. And in Jericho, some things happen. I mean, right off the bat, he walks into Jericho, and he heals this blind guy who cries out to him. So he heals him, and then there's a huge buzz around town, like, oh man, Jesus healed that guy. You know, this is crazy. Everybody wants to see what's going on. And then Jesus spends the afternoon with this tax collector named Zacchaeus, that nobody liked, all right, in town, because Zacchaeus was a tax collector, and that means he worked for the foreign, oppressive Roman government, even though he was a Jewish guy, so he was considered a traitor, and people hated him, yet Jesus spends the afternoon at his house, and so people were grumbling and complaining about that, like, you know, none of us ever complain about anything. They're all complaining about Jesus, right? And so after that, Jesus spends some time teaching. We talked about kind of some of the things that he talked about last week, and now this week, Jesus, he leaves Jericho, and he makes his way south, and he walks about 16 miles to the next town, which is this smaller town called Bethany, which is only about 2 miles away from Jerusalem, kind of sits on the outskirts. And when they get to Bethany, John tells us that they get there 6 days before the Passover. Now, the Passover is a festival that the Jewish people celebrate, and actually they still do celebrate this to this day. And the Passover festival is, back then it was coupled with another festival, and so it was basically an 8-day long holiday. So picture Christmas like for 8 days. Okay, so that's what the Jewish people would do. They would travel. Jewish people from all over the world would travel to Jerusalem for these 8 days to celebrate. And it really, the Passover takes root from the Old Testament, from back 1,500 years before that, from back when God uses Moses to lead the Jewish people out of Egypt. And when they're out and they're heading to the promised land that God's promised them, God goes to Moses and says, hey, this is what we're going to do. I want you to create a holiday, like a festival, so that you guys will celebrate what I did for you. You guys didn't do it. I did this. I led you guys out of Egypt where you had been slaves for 400 years. He's saying, I want you guys to celebrate this so you don't forget what I did for you. And so think about it. That was 1,500 years before Jesus. And during Jesus' time, they're still celebrating it. And again, even 2,000 years after Jesus, they're still celebrating this. So it's been around for a long time. And so John's given us context to kind of what's going on here. He's saying 6 days before the Passover, so this would have been Saturday, the Saturday before Jesus died. He says Jesus came to the town of Bethany, the village of Bethany, where Lazarus was, the one who Jesus had raised from the dead. And so what John's doing here is he has given us the context to where and what's going on, or what type of, or what town this was. He's saying, hey, he went to Bethany. Which Bethany was that? Oh, you know, the one where Lazarus lived. Wait, which Lazarus? Oh, you know, the Lazarus that Jesus raised from the dead. And so John's original audience, as they're reading this, they're like, oh, that guy, we know him. Oh, that town, we know what town you're talking about. But for us, some of us, sometimes we have to be reminded about what Jesus is talking about, or what John's talking about here. And so what I want to do for maybe, a chunk of today, it's a pretty big chunk. I want to talk about a story, what John is talking about right here, that really leads into everything that's about to happen for the week. So does that make sense? And this happens only 2 weeks before. So we're going to back up 2 weeks, and I'm going to tell you what happened. Good? Okay, I'll take it, I guess. Got no other options, but all right. Here, so Jesus, he's friends with this guy named Lazarus. They're actually really close friends. Lazarus has got 2 sisters, Mary and Martha. Jesus is really close to them as well, and we see them in some other parts earlier in Jesus' ministry when he's doing his thing. But Lazarus, 2 weeks before this, Lazarus gets really, really, really sick, and Jesus isn't around. I mean, Jesus, he's somewhere else. He's about a day's walk away, wherever he is, we don't know. And so Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, they're like desperate for Jesus because Lazarus isn't getting any better. All right, he's getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And so they're at this point where they're like, man, is he going to die? Like, what's going to happen? Let's figure out we got to get Jesus here quick because we've seen him heal people. We've seen him help people, and we need Jesus' help. And so back up one chapter, John chapter 11, verse 3. It says they come up with a plan. So the sisters, they send a message to Jesus, and they say, hey, Lord, the one who you love is sick. Now, imagine this. Imagine being so close with Jesus that someone is talking about you to Jesus, and they don't even have to mention your name. All they say is, hey, the one who you love is sick. They just have to say the one who you love, and Jesus knows exactly who they're talking about. I mean, imagine that. I mean, these guys are close. And Jesus knew immediately who the message was talking about because Lazarus and Jesus are super good friends. I mean, this is the type of friend where, you got those friends that can just walk in your house. They don't have to knock. They don't knock. They just walk in. Or maybe it's a family member or something. They feel super comfortable. You guys got a good relationship. You got any of those? Okay, some of you guys need better friends apparently, or maybe friends at all. I don't know what the deal is here. But it's like that. This happened just a couple of weeks ago. We had, I was wrestling with the boys, in the living room, and all of a sudden, my friend is just standing there and watching us. I'm like, where'd you come from? It's just kind of funny, but it's okay. And I don't mind. It's not a big deal. And but this is just good relationships, all right? This is the kind of friend, Lazarus and Jesus, they're kind of friends where it's like they got the refrigerator rights. You know that friend? All right? If you don't have the friend that'll just walk in, then you have the friend who will just walk into your fridge and they'll grab whatever they want, and it's totally cool. You're not even upset about it because it's like you do that at their house too. So it's like an even trade. You try to make it even. You know what I'm talking about? You guys got friends like that? The refrigerator? Okay. All right, Jesus probably had refrigerator rights to Lazarus' fridge, I'm guessing. That's how tight they are. And so John tells us in verse 5, he says, now Jesus, just in case we had any question, just in case we didn't understand what's going on with the last verse, he says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister Mary and Lazarus. Like they're tight, okay? They're super close. They got a great relationship with each other. And so when he heard that he was sick, he was like, oh man, we got to go. Like, let's go now. We don't got any time to waste. And so he goes up to his hotel room. He gets his suitcase or whatever. He packs all his stuff in. He grabs it and he jumps on the first like caravan. I don't know what they did. Donkey, camel, whatever, out of town. All right? No, that's not what he did. You would think that's what he would do, but it's not. It says, so when he heard, this is super interesting to me, that when he heard that Lazarus was sick, Jesus stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. What? Jesus, he stayed 2 more days? See, this type of stuff, this don't sit well with our culture at all. I mean, in fact, many of us have probably wrestled with this question like more than once in our life, where it's like, hey, God. All right, if you love me, then why am I going through this pain? You ever think about a question like that before? Or you ever pray that before? Like, I'm not saying out loud or nothing. I'm like, you ever think that? All right, it's like, God, what's going on? Why do I have this pain in my life? And by the way, just to answer that question, all right, I think, just to get that answer out there, I think there can be a million good reasons to why we're going through pain. I mean, every single one of us, I'm sure we can think back to something in our life that we've been through that was super painful, that kind of rocked our world maybe. And we can now, in hindsight, look back at that situation, probably not while the storm is going on, but after the storm has passed, we can look back and say, oh yeah, okay, I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I went through that. Oh, I could see the good that came from that. Any of you guys ever experienced that before? Okay, yeah, like that happens, all right? That's probably happened in all of our lives. And so I think there could be a million reasons to why God allows pain in our life, or whatever situation is going on in our life that we don't appreciate, that we didn't plan on being there. And the thing we got to remember is that God doesn't owe us a painless life. He doesn't. God never promises us a painless life. In fact, Jesus tells his disciples, he's like, man, all right, you're going to follow me. That's cool. That's good. Your life's probably going to get harder when it comes to like pain and stuff, right? Your life's going to get harder because of this. And I don't know where it came from that we think that, God owes us a pain-free life. But the truth is, in this story, like what John has told us, the truth is Jesus loves Lazarus. Lazarus is sick. Both can be true at the same time. All right, both can be true at the same time. And I think for us, it's just confusing to us because when we're in the moment and we got this thing in our life that we don't want, this thing in our life that we don't appreciate, this thing in our life that's just painful, whatever the situation might be, because we've all been through all kinds of different things, all right, some worse than others. I think it's really hard for us to see the good in it. And I think for me personally, when I'm going through wrestling with stuff in my life, a lot of times I think back to the story of Job. All right, in the Old Testament, I mean, I know you guys know I love me some Job, okay? I love that story. It's a good story. It's a real story, so super interesting. How Job, remember, he loses everything. He loses it all. He loses his wealth. He loses his kids, all right? His wife is telling him just to give up and die, and then he loses his health. Okay, and he's just super super painful. He's got boils on his skin, just terrible stuff where he's scraping it off. I mean, just horrible, horrible stuff. Remember Job, throughout the whole thing, he's like, hey, God gives and God takes away. God gives and God takes away. But after a while, it wears him down and he's laying out in the middle of nowhere, like at the city dump, remember? And he hits his breaking point where he cries out to God and he says something to the effect of, hey, God, what you're doing to me or what you've allowed in my life is not fair. This isn't fair. All right? I serve you. I got a good relationship with you. I don't understand why you're allowing all this pain in my life. And remember, he gets pretty confident. He says, hey, God, you know what? Actually, if I could, I know this isn't possible, but if I could, I wish I could take you to court because I think I'd win. That's pretty bold. But Job had been through so much. He hit his breaking point. Remember how God answers that? Remember he comes up in like this storm thing, all right? Appears right before Job, and God says, get ready. I got some questions for you, Job. Right after Job says this, and remember God peppers Job with like 30 to 40 questions of all this stuff. He's like, hey, Job, by the way, since you know everything, and since you know the difference between right and wrong, and since you can judge better than I can, where were you when I created, I don't know, earth? Were you there? Are you the one who tells lightning where to go? Were you there when I created this animal and this animal and this animal? Did you make this animal fast? Do you feed this? Do you do this? Do you do this? And all of these questions are not answerable, all right, Job can't answer them. And so at the end, remember of that like 2 chapters of just peppering him, which shows the power of God. Remember how Job responds? He gets down. He's like, okay, I get it. I'm nothing but dust. See, God's whole point is, you don't understand what I'm doing. And you can't, because you're not God. And that's the perspective that we need to remember in our life. We don't understand how God is using the bad stuff that happens in their life. Remember, we as Christians, you know what God tells us? In the New Testament, God says, hey, you know what? Everything that happens in your life, no matter if it's good or bad. So think of like the worst thing that could happen to you. God says, actually, I promise I'm going to use that for good. It's a promise to Christians. And so we know that he can, and we know that he does for those of us who have given our lives over to Jesus, which isn't everybody in this room, but probably the majority of us. Just because we don't understand what's going on doesn't mean God's not doing something with the pain in our life. And I bet the disciples are thinking something very similar. I bet this is very, very, very confusing to them as well, because they're like, whoa, Jesus, I thought, if he's sick, like, shouldn't we do something? But here's the deal. Jesus, like he so often was up to something. A couple days go by, and he gathers his disciples. He says, hey, okay, this is what we're going to do. Guys, we're going to go to Bethany now, all right? This is time. We're going to go back. And his disciples are like, hey, Jesus, I don't know if we should do that or not because, I know you're God and everything, and you don't forget. But just in case maybe you forgot this one time, the last time we were in the area, remember the religious leaders, right? They were trying to kill you, okay? Like they're trying to kill you. They're trying to put you to death. And they don't like us either. And so it's probably not safe for us to go. And so are you sure that we really should go that way? I don't know if that's the best thing for us to do. And it's so interesting that, the religious leaders of that day, they're the ones trying to put Jesus to death. And I feel like I say this so often, but I just like thinking this way. Like Jesus, the ultimate religious leader, he's God in a man. He did not gravitate towards religious people. He didn't. In fact, they constantly butt heads with each other. And so John says, in verse 11, Jesus says this, he says, then he told them, he's like, this is why we're going, okay? Our friend Lazarus, your friend Lazarus, remember the disciples, they're probably good friends with Lazarus too. He says, he has fallen asleep, but I'm on my way to wake him up. And so the disciples are like, what are you talking about? And so they start giving Jesus some medical advice. They're like, hey, Jesus, I don't know how things work up in heaven. But here, if he's fallen asleep, if he's sleeping, that'll help him get well. They already know he's sick. They're like, that's how it works here. You rest, you get better. So we should probably just let him rest. Let's not go wake him up. And so Jesus, however, as John's telling us, was actually speaking about Lazarus' death. Basically, in a nice way, he's saying, hey, Lazarus has passed away. Lazarus has fallen asleep. And the disciples are like, good, let him nap. That's good. But they thought he was speaking about natural sleep. And so Jesus then told him plainly, he's like, okay, guys, this is what I mean. Lazarus is actually dead. He's died. All right, he's gone. And then he says something so interesting. He says, and I'm glad. What? Glad? Basically, what Jesus is saying, he's saying, I'm glad I didn't save him. Right? It sounds so foreign to us. There's something about that, I don't know, it just doesn't sit well with us. We're like, I'm glad. After all, just think about this. Lazarus and Jesus are supposed to be such good friends. Like, what kind of really good friend who has the ability to save you chooses not to when you need him the most? Doesn't sound like, from our perspective, like a really good friend. Right? That's probably what they're thinking. In fact, our culture would say that's a really bad friend. But there's a reason why Jesus is doing this, and he's doing it for a good reason. That's what he says. He says, I'm glad that I didn't heal him for you. I'm glad for you that I wasn't there so I could have healed him. And here's the reason. He says, so that you may believe in me. So let's go. He says, then Thomas, all right, this guy is not the most positive guy, people like that, at work or whatever, at school, at work, on the team, who's like, they're always like they're like the Debbie Downer, you know what I'm talking about? All right, glass half empty type people. Some of you guys are probably that guy, all right? He says, that, especially this service this morning, man, you guys are killing me. No. He says, then Thomas, he said to his fellow disciples, he said, all right, fine, Jesus. He's pushed back twice already. Remember, they're going to kill us, and he's like, oh, just let Lazarus sleep. Now he's saying, let's go too, so that we may die with Lazarus. Lazarus is dead. Jesus, the religious leaders are trying to kill you. Remember, Bethany is only 2 miles away from Jerusalem. It's super close. Like, why don't we all just go and die? So this guy is not the most positive disciple that Jesus has. He's not the most upbeat guy. Now, maybe when he's saying this, he's being sarcastic, like, oh, great, we're all going to go die. Like, that's not something that he's happy about. I don't know if you guys have ever had like a friend or anything that maybe you guys have disagreed on what to do. And that friend just kind of shoots like little jabs here and there. Here's an example of that. When it was a few years ago, maybe 15 years ago or so, right out of high school, my dad and I, we went on an elk hunt in Colorado, okay? And so this is basically, you get up early in the morning, you walk or ride horses. This day we were walking down a road, and then you go off the road and, walk over like 20 mountains, okay? It felt like, and then you stop, you hunt, and then you come back for lunch and stuff like that. So that was like our routine for the 2 weeks that we were there. One day we do that, and we didn't get anything, didn't even see an elk. They weren't in that region of the state, apparently, at that time. But we're there, and we're like, all right, time to go back to camp. And I'm like, all right, let's go. And he's like, no, it's not that way, it's this way. And I'm like, no, it's this way. We're pointing in two opposite directions. Now, one of us is really, really wrong, And we kind of have a little heated, a lot of you guys know my dad, we have a little heated argument about it. I'm like, and then it just came to the point where I'm like, you know what, Dad? I don't care where you go. I'm going this way. I'll see you later. You can't stop me. And my dad, he's my dad, right? Like he can't leave me. I'm out in the wilderness by myself. I'm a 18-year-old kid. It's not like he doesn't have an option. I have an option. I'm like, you're a grown man. Good luck. Watch out for the bears, that type of thing. But he can't leave me. So he follows me as I just start walking. But he's like 25 yards, 50 yards behind. And he's just throwing out these little jabs here and there. He's like, you ready to turn around yet? Or like, hey, we're going to have to walk all this again. Or, man, I really missed lunch. I wish we could be at lunch right now, but we won't get, we're not going to get, just stuff, little things here and there where I'm just like, making me mad. I'm just like, I'm going. I don't care if I'm wrong. I'm going straight until I find something, And so we did that, and eventually we got to the road where I told him it was. And I've been able to lord that over him for the last 15 years, and I remind him about it every 6 months or so. He lost his sense of direction, apparently. But it's those little darts. My guess is that Thomas is the same way, right? He's a little frustrated on what's going on. He thinks they're making the complete opposite wrong decision. And here he is. He's like, all right, let's go. We're all going to die, right? That type of guy. We're all going to die. This is great. Jesus, great idea. And then remember, they have a whole day's walk, so he's probably doing that all day. He thinks they should go in the opposite direction. But when they go, they go anyway, and when they get close to the town of Bethany, the sisters come running up, and they're crying. You got Mary and Martha, they're crying. And turns out that Lazarus, at this point, has been dead for 4 days. He's been dead. And you know what they asked Jesus as soon as they run up, both of them? They're both like, Jesus, where were you? What's going on? Why didn't you come? We sent a messenger to you, and you delayed. You took your time. If you would have been here, you could have healed Lazarus. I mean, have you ever prayed something like that? We're like, God, you could have fixed this mess. You could have stopped this from happening, but you didn't. Where you're just like, God, you're late. Do you care? Are you there? Does this at all matter to you? And when Jesus sees their sadness, it's the shortest verse in the entire Bible, and John, who is there, he's an eyewitness to this, he writes this. It says, Jesus cried. The emotion moves him, and he cries, and the people around, there's a whole crowd. It's not just Mary and Martha there. There's a whole crowd of people who are all mourning Lazarus' death. And when they see Jesus crying, I mean, they start saying, some of them are like, hey, wow, look at Jesus. Look at the emotion he's got. He really cared for Lazarus. He really loved him. Like, I told you they were good friends. And then other people in the crowd, they're like, well, then why didn't he come? They're asking the same thing that Mary and Martha have both asked. They're like, why didn't he go? I don't understand why he didn't stop this from happening. And so you got both people in the crowd saying the same thing. And in verse 36, it says, or 38, it says, then Jesus, deeply moved again, he came to the tomb. It actually was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Remember, John's watching this. He's there. And Jesus goes up to the tomb, and he says, hey, remove that stone, Jesus said. And everybody's just like, that's a bad idea, man. All right, that's a bad idea. In fact, Mary, his sister, come running up, and they say, hey, Lord, you don't understand. There's already a stench because he's been dead for 4 days. She's like, it's hot. He's been dead. It's going to stink. This is not the way we want to honor Lazarus. I don't know what you're doing, Jesus, but this is, let's go back, okay? Let's go the opposite way here. And Jesus said to her, he says, hey, didn't I tell you that if you believed, that you would see the glory of God? He's saying, hey, Martha, don't you believe? Don't you know that I care? Don't you know that I'm good? Don't you know that I could do anything that I want? And so they removed the stone. And then Jesus raised his eyes and he prays this. He says, hey, Father, I thank you that you heard me and hear me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd standing here, I'm saying this so that they may believe, God, that you sent me. He's saying, I'm about to do something that's about to be crazy, and I'm doing this, you know, Father, only because you sent me, so that they can know that you and I are one. And after he said this, he shouted with a loud voice. He says, hey, Lazarus, come on out. And my guess is that the whole crowd is standing there, and they're just like, this is so awkward, right? Like they're all like, oh, Jesus, at least do something that you could kind of play off that, here's the reason why it didn't happen. You're gonna call this dead man to come walking out like this is embarrassing. Like this is so, I don't know, awkward. And everybody's just kind of squirming a little bit. And it says, and then John is writing this and he's like, no, I was there, man. That dead man came out, bound hand and foot with the linen strips, all right, with his face wrapped in the cloth. You can't see where he's going. He's got all this cloth around him because he's been, buried in this, or he's been laid in this tomb, wrapped around with all this stuff. And it doesn't sound like anybody from the crowd does anything. Like they're all just like, are you serious? You seeing what I'm seeing? Like, is this a ghost? Like, is this for real? Are my eyes playing tricks on me? Like, is this how did Jesus stage this? Like, what is going on here? Because nobody goes and helps the guy out. In fact, Jesus has to tell him to do it. He's like, hey, unwrap him. Help him out, Maybe they even take a step back. I don't know. But then they go and they help him out and they let him go. And here's like the duh statement, all right? Here's the statement that John gives us. He's like, we're all like, oh, yeah, duh. He says, because of this, therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he did believed in him. I bet they did. Right? Like there's no denying it. These are the same people who had attended Lazarus' funeral days before. And now they're talking with the man. And they're eating with the man. This is the next verse. But some of them, they went to the Pharisees. Those are the religious leaders. And they told them what Jesus had done. Now, when the religious leaders, they hear this, they don't know what to do. They don't know what's going on. They don't know how Jesus pulled this off. They don't like it. And so they immediately call a meeting. In the next verse, it says, so the chief priests and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they convened the Sanhedrin. That's like their cool club for religious people. And they were saying, hey, what are we going to do since this man is doing many signs? All right, look what he did. They're saying he raised a guy from the dead. Like, what do we do about that? And then they say, if we let him go on like this. Now, I bet when he's writing this at the end of his life, all right? He's super old. He's actually been exiled by the Roman government on an island called Patmos, and he's writing this down for people. And he's like, hey, this is what happened. And I bet when he writes this, maybe he kind of laughs a little bit, right? He's like, when he knows what they said, he's like, they said, if we let him go on like this, and he's probably like, first of all, how arrogant is that? Right? Like, as if Jesus needed their permission to do anything. Jesus is God. As if they let him do anything. Jesus didn't need their permission. Everything that Jesus did was on purpose, with a purpose in mind. Jesus knew exactly what was going on. And so here's these guys, but they think they can control everything, and they're just like, man, if we let him go on, right? And they're about to succeed in their minds. They're going to, they don't know what's going to happen. That John, when he's writing this at the end of his life, is just like, man, if only these people knew. Like, what idiots, Yeah, they'll put him to death, but he's not going to stay dead. And a bunch of people are going to believe because they're going to see Jesus walking around after that, and it's going to be crazy. And they thought Lazarus was bad. Wait till they do it to Jesus, and it's huge, public. His execution is public, and then he comes back from the dead. Like, this is about to get crazy. If only these people knew. They think they have control, and they don't. It says if we let him go on like this, everyone, all the people are going to believe. Everybody's going to buy into this stuff, and they'll believe in Jesus. And the Romans, those people, the Jewish people, they'll crown Jesus as their king, which is what the disciples thought. They were going to Jerusalem Jerusalem to do, and they're going to worship him. And then the Rome, they're not going to appreciate that, so they're going to come in, and the Rome will take away both our place and our nation. And basically, these guys are saying, hey, we got a lot to lose. Enough is enough. And they start looking for a way to kill Jesus. So that's what makes this story so important, because the raising of Lazarus from the dead, it triggers the events that happen in the next few weeks that would actually lead to Jesus' death. And guess what? Jesus knew it. That's what happened a couple weeks before Jesus arrives back in Bethany. Okay, now to finish just real quick what happens in Bethany. Back to John 12. So 6 days before the Passover, we get the Saturday before this big festival. Jesus came to Bethany. You know where Bethany was. It was the one where Lazarus lived. And you know Lazarus, he was the one that Jesus raised from the dead a couple weeks before. Okay, we're all on the same page? Okay, all right. Next verse says, so they gave a dinner for him there. I bet they did. You know, I'm sure of course they're going to give a dinner for Jesus. He had done this huge thing. Mark and Matthew also record this story for us in their accounts. And Matthew was also there. He was one of Jesus' disciples. And Mark was around a lot. He was probably a teenager when all this stuff was happening. And so Mark may have been there too. But they tell us that this happens actually in the house of a guy named Simon the leper. The leper was just what he was known as, meaning he used to have this disease called leprosy, but they didn't anymore. And so, Jesus had probably cured him of that. And so you also got that going on. So he's given the dinner, and Lazarus is there. Martha was serving them, and Lazarus was one of those reclining, probably with Simon and Jesus and the disciples at the table with him. And so we got Lazarus, and, he's doing his thing. And Lazarus wasn't planning on being there, obviously, and because he was dead just a couple weeks before. And then Martha, she's doing her thing. She's serving. And so the question is, where the heck is Mary? What's Mary doing? What's going on with her? Next verse says that Mary took a pound of perfume. This was pure and expensive nard. Now, this stuff that she's got cost a ton of money to get. In fact, this was stuff that this nard came from India, and so it was really hard to get a hold of, and this stuff was really expensive. I mean, this was worth a year's salary. All right, so picture this perfume in this bottle was worth as much as your house, okay? That's what she had, so don't drop it, all right? That'd be a terrible, terrible thing. And so she walks into the room with this stuff, and this stuff was used especially for people when they died, all right, to cover up the smell. You'd still pay your respects. You wouldn't want to smell a dead body, and so you'd be covered with this nard. But that was always usually watered down. This stuff is pure stuff. And so the disciples watch her walk in with it, and I bet they're all thinking the same thing, like, whoa, where did you get that? Man, that's some expensive stuff. What is going on with that? Like, are you donating that? We'll write you a good tax, we'll get you the tax stuff done on that. Well, that's worth some money. All right, that's tax-free. Give it to us. Just all this stuff. But Mary doesn't hand it over to the disciples. She doesn't even hand it over to Jesus. She doesn't say anything like, hey, here, sell this. All right, this will support you in your next year. This will cover all the expenses you got. Or, hey, use this in whatever way you best think. She doesn't do that. She opens up the bottle, and Matthew and Mark tell us that she pours it on top of Jesus' head, right on him, and it drips down all the way down to his feet. And John tells us this is Mary. She took a pound of perfume, pure and expensive nard, and she anointed Jesus' feet, and she wiped his feet with her hair, which was also considered super humbling. Like, women don't do that, all right? And so the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. How many of you guys are like me? Once in a while, you'll have your lunch in like a Tupperware thing, and you won't need it or whatever, and for whatever reason, and then you forget about it, and you find it in your car like a month later. You know what I'm talking about? Does that ever happen? No? Okay. Well, happens to me a lot. So, and then you open it up. Well, that's what you do, right? You open it up because you want to see what's in there. Like, oh, I didn't know. Oh, it's just like, oh, and it like hits you like a ton of bricks. You're like, dude, that thing did not age well, and it's grown. And, you're like, well, I think it's alive now, And usually that's when I just hand it to Kate, and I'm like, here you go. It needs cleaned or thrown out or something. But it just fills the room, or it fills your car when you open it. That's what this stuff is, only this stuff smells super good, all right? This is really good stuff. People want to smell like this stuff. And so everybody in the whole house, they know what's going on, because if they didn't see her open it, they definitely smell it now, and it's super strong. The next verse says, then one of the disciples happens to be Judas Iscariot, who John writes is about to betray him, although they didn't know that at the time. John's writing this looking back. Judas says, hey, Mary, what are you doing? Why wasn't this perfume sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? He's like, hey, you could have sold this for so much money. Now, John writes, because he's adding in his little commentary here, he says he didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and he was in charge of the money bag and would steal part of what was put in it. And so Jesus answered Judas. So Judas, he's like, Mary, what are you doing? You should have done this with it. You could have helped the poor. And Jesus is like, hey, Judas, leave her alone. She has kept it for the day of my burial, for you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. And probably at that, the disciples were like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you will not always be here? Now, some people ask, well, so what's this mean? Jesus doesn't care about the poor? No, he cares about the poor, okay? He's pro-poor. All right? He does care about the poor. But here's the deal. Worship trumps activity. And sometimes those things can be both, so it's a little confusing, but this is what I mean. There are many churches all around that all around us that do good stuff, okay? There's no denying it. It is good stuff, but then they also reject the truth in the Bible. All right? There's many churches that take activity, meaning doing good things that we are supposed to do because of the gospel, and they elevate it above the gospel. That's a problem. That is completely backwards. And here's Jesus. He's basically saying, hey, don't ever do that. It's not about doing good stuff. We don't do good stuff to somehow impress God. All right, we do good stuff because God has saved us and we are nothing and we are messed up. And we owe him. See, Mary, she seems to get it. Judas doesn't. Right? Think about Mary, right? She wants to honor Jesus the best way she can. I mean, think about it. Remember, her brother Lazarus has just died just a couple weeks ago. And for some reason, we don't know the reason or whatever, she did not deem it worthy enough, all right, to use this on him, on Lazarus. And maybe, I don't know what changed in her. Maybe she's so thankful for Jesus bringing Lazarus back, whatever the reason. It doesn't matter. She humbles herself in public in front of others, and she worships Jesus. And when she worships Jesus, it costs her a lot. In contrast, look at Judas. Right? Judas, he's all about what Jesus and his ministry can do for him. In fact, he was willing to steal from Jesus to help himself. And so often, I think we as Christians, here's the issue, we think a heck of a lot like Judas. Right? What we think is, hey, what can Jesus do for me? All right, what's Jesus going to do for me? What's this church how's this church going to help me? I mean, think about it. We even pick churches this way. We go, hey, I hope this church meets my needs. I want this church to be my style. I want this church, how is this church going to make me feel? Instead, it should be, hey, what can I do to serve and worship Jesus here? It shouldn't be about us. We aren't even in the equation. It's all about Jesus. And a lot of us, we're only good with Jesus as long as it doesn't cost us anything. As long as we get some benefit that we can, usually it's something that we can see, that we can actually handle in our life. As long as Jesus keeps the bad things from happening in our lives. As long as Jesus keeps the pain away. And when we start thinking like that, we're on Team Judas, not Team Jesus. And that's a scary place to be. And so this event of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, coming back to Bethany. He leaves because they're trying to kill him after that. He comes back to Bethany 2 weeks later. All this buzz is going around town. I mean, think about it even. So that's happened. You got Simon, who used to be the leper. Okay, he's there. We know. You got Lazarus, who was once dead. He's around. You got Jesus, the guy who raised Lazarus from the dead and who's done all this stuff, who's kind of a local celebrity around the entire region. Like, there's a lot going on in this little town 2 miles away from Jerusalem, right before the biggest holiday and the biggest festival that Jewish people celebrate all year. And John ends it in verse 9, he says, then a large crowd of Jews learned that he was there, and they came not only because of Jesus, but to also see Lazarus. Heck yeah, who wouldn't want to see the dead man, who's walking around and stuff? So I want to see Lazarus with my own eyes. And so they see Lazarus as well, but the chief priests had decided to kill Lazarus also, because he was the reason many of the Jews were deserting them and believing in Jesus. So these guys, these religious leaders are like, hey, man, now, maybe instead of not just, instead of just killing Jesus, now we got to also kill Lazarus, because Lazarus is part of the problem now that he's been raised from the dead. And all of this sets up what happens next, because the very next day, Jesus finishes his trip, and he rides into Jerusalem on a donkey, and everything's about to go down. And we'll talk about what happens next week. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this and for this story and just telling us what happened. And Lord, you have not promised us an easy life. You have not promised us a painless life. In fact, you've promised us that we will go through pain and we will have hardships, but we also always have you to lean on. And God, we thank you for that. We thank you that you're so much smarter than us and you do things the way they should be done. And the honest truth is, if we had control of our lives, they would be a mess. God, we thank you for caring about us and thank you for loving us. We thank you for taking this road to Jerusalem where you knew you were going to die and be killed. Not just any death, but a horrible, terrible, awful death. God, we thank you for that. You love us and you don't have to. You died for us and you didn't have to do that either. And we thank you so much. God, we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you here next week at Grace.